Welcome to another edition of Answers for the Family. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza, and for those of you that have been listening, sending in questions and comments, thank you so much. And please continue to help spread the word that each week this show will bring on special guests that can inspire, educate, and in some cases entertain, while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. And we will introduce you to top professionals and talented authors who are working to make this world a better place for all of us. Now, I would really appreciate it if you would all do me a big favor. Please forward one of our shows to your social media group or to someone you know who can benefit from today's show. I guarantee you we will all know somebody that can benefit from this show. Now, this is one powerful way that we together can make a positive difference in the world. Now, all the negativity and divisiveness out there these days, I hope that you will find answersforthefamily.com to be a place that you can go to see and hear some of the good that is happening throughout the world. And with this in mind, if there was ever a time in recent years that we needed to focus on gratitude, this is the time. Well, my son Chase and I wrote the Attitude of Gratitude Journal, something that at the time was geared towards teens going through some challenges in their life. Well, we're all going through some challenges in our lives, so please go to our website at answersforthefamily.com and download a free copy. It is our gift to you. All I ask is that you subscribe, which again is for free, and give it 21 days. Comment on whatever platform you listen to us on, what focusing on gratitude has meant for you and your family. Now, a quote from the journal: acknowledging the good that you already have in your life is the foundation for all abundance. And that is by Eckhart Tolle. Now, our topic today is transforming grief and fear into love and grace. Our guest, psychotherapist and best-selling author and international speaker, Patti Ashley, brings unique insight to the identification and treatment of trauma, shame, grief, and dysfunctional family patterns. Her signature authenticity architecture model creates long-term changes in the brain and central nervous system, breaking through ingrained barriers to personal freedom and authentic growth. Now, including the truth of self-love and belonging and connection. Now, with over 35 years experience, Dr. Ashley has counseled individuals, couples, families, and groups in mental health agencies, psychiatric hospitals, and private practice settings. She is also responsible for having developed and taught continuing education courses for physicians, hospital wellness programs, universities, and private organizations. Patti holds a Ph.D. in psychology from the Union Institute and University. She is the author of Living in the Shadow of the Too Good Mother archetype, Letters to Freedom, and her newest Shame-Informed Therapy, The Art of Architecture of Reconstructing the Authentic Self. Patti, welcome to Answers for the Family.
Thank you, Alan. It's delightful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, and I think before we went on, I was telling you that I had a chance to go through some of your books, and I look forward to the opportunity actually of reading all three of them because they were all very engaging. One of the things that caught my eye right away was you talk about the 5 stages of grief.
Mhm.
And with everything that people are going through now, I think that we not only have 5 stages of grief, but I think grief can be brought on in many different ways. Can you share a little bit about the different ways it can be brought on and what those 5 stages are?
Yeah, it's a really good question because sometimes people think of grief as a physical death, but there's so many other ways that we grieve. Anytime there's a change in our life, anytime there's a
Mhm.
loss, an ending, we experience what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross defined as the 5 stages of grief. And they are briefly, and I'll talk more about each one, but denial. It's kind of like when we're in shock in a car accident, we can't feel the pain. So when we lose something, we're like, no, that's not happening. Bargaining, and then that's, well, could I have done something different? What did I do wrong? That kind of thinking. Anger, and anger is sometimes misunderstood because we don't have a lot of healthy models for what to do with anger, and the feeling is okay, but some of the behaviors might not be. And that's a tricky one, being angry for things like death, someone dying, anyway, that's part of grief. And then there is the depression and the deep sadness that comes with the loss, and then acceptance. Now, none of those are linear, and we move in and out of them over a period of time. And there is no time frame in grief. Everybody's grief is different. A grief of losing someone physically to death, which I've experienced 2 times in my life, well, many times in my life, but the 2 significant ones were when I lost my father when I was 11 of a sudden heart attack, and then my fiance when I was 58, the same way, of a sudden heart attack. So that's why I wrote my book, Letters to Freedom, because I felt like it was really important to tell the story of how I've experienced grief in my life. As far as the question about other forms of grief, that's a really good one, because we are all in kind of a collective grief right now. There's a loss of our lives as we know it. Nothing is really the same, and there's adjustments that people are having to make in their work life and their home life and their social life. And so there's grief in all of that. And there's grief in the fact that people are dying and people can't be with the people they love when they're dying. And there's grief around the job losses. And, we could go on and on and on. And I always look, when I work with a client in my psychotherapy practice, I always look for grief, because I had an incredible teacher once who said, all depression is unresolved grief. And I thought that's really interesting. If we really look at what ending is happening, what loss is there, it explains a lot about our feelings and helps us connect to those stages of grief and gives us permission to move through them, because we can't go around them, we have to go through them. But we live in a culture that wants to go around uncomfortable feelings, which I can talk a whole lot more about all of that. But I hope that answered your question.
Definitely. And one of the things that you touch on, and obviously it's in the title of one of the books, but it's, how does grief serve as a passageway to love and grace? Because that's not something that we would normally go, okay, I'm going to take this pathway. That's one of the things that I really love about the book is that, it's one thing to, I think, go into something and go, okay, we're going to help somebody deal with this. But to take it into something as beautiful as love and grace, I think is exceptional. So share a little bit about that, please.
Thank you. I'll share my personal story of how that came to me. My fiance, who died of a sudden heart attack, just like my father, had lost his wife to a brain tumor fairly quickly. She was diagnosed and then died 2 months later. And I had known this man for years. We worked in the same field in the area. He was an addiction treatment counselor, incredible human being. And he, in his grief, found that what happened was the loss of this woman, this wife of 20 years, opened his heart to something bigger, something he had never experienced before. And he said, I feel like it's what I would call grace. So he started teaching his courses to his students, from fear to love to grace. So after he died, I made that the subtitle of my book and divided my book into 3 parts. Fear, which is losing my father as a child. Love, which is the nice romantic story of the 2 years that Lawrence and I had together. And then the grace of how then did I find the grace? What does that mean? And what does that mean? I don't know. I interviewed 18 authors when I launched the book and asked them all, what grace means to them. And language is a funny thing. We all have different perceptions of what the word means. But to me, it's this idea that there's something bigger, like my partner said, and very much like the Sufi prayer, break my heart open to a higher love. There's something bigger in all of us that I don't think we necessarily tap into unless we've experienced extreme loss. Maybe I'm wrong. That's just a broad statement. But I know in my own personal life and watching the lives of others, when we're in deep grief, we're searching for something because we've lost something that is very important to us. And so that's when we ask the bigger questions of, why am I here? What's my life about? What happens after I die? And then for me, because that's been my whole entire life search, having lost my dad at 11 and being Catholic and told he was in heaven, I was like, well, where's heaven? I want to go. Why can't I go? Why don't, I want to know about this. And so I've been through all kinds of spiritual searches to only discover it's a mystery. Like, we're not supposed to know. We're supposed to live in the grace of this unconditional love and this experience of human connection. And I think right now in this time, Alan, it's so important for us to get that. I think we're all feeling really disconnected, and we're all feeling fear, and we're all acting out in all kinds of different ways. So,
Well, I couldn't agree more. And although I think that you can maybe even take things too far, but let's talk about, at least for myself, and I think for many other people, in my past, I spent a lot of time trying to be resistant to anything that was uncomfortable. I was going to avoid it, or I was going to, I felt, work above it or work through it or somehow dance around it, but not really have to deal with it. Share a little bit how being resistant to this feelings of discomfort in many cases actually just keeps us stuck in grief.
it's a great question. Carl Jung said, what we resist persists and often grows stronger. And Deepak Chopra says people think the shadow is the opposite of love, but actually it is the way to love. And the shadow is our dark feelings that we don't want to acknowledge because we fear that they're bad. Because, I've studied and researched, I have background in child development, my second degree is in early childhood education. I've been extremely curious about raising healthy children, and I've been a parent educator. My daughter and I are doing some parent education programs now. She has 2 young children, and I feel like it's really important for us to look at these old parenting belief systems that said, spare the rod, spoil the child, beat the devil out of a child before they're old, and break the will before they're old enough to remember. Don't be angry. Feelings are bad. This was the belief system of the majority of families until the mid 20th century, when we started researching what children need for optimal development. And we realized, wow, we've been doing this wrong for a long time. And now we also know that we possibly, research is showing, we could be carrying 14 generations of ancestral trauma in our DNA. So my first book, Living in the Shadow of the Too Good Mother Archetype, was in my doctoral dissertation, where I was talking to women about what it means to be a good enough mother. And no one could say they've ever felt good enough. And so I thought, well, this is because what's gone into the shadow is this inability to express our feelings and our inability to tolerate uncomfortable feelings because we've been talked out of them. So if we have a child having a temper tantrum, and the old school said beat the child, and then the new research is telling parents don't beat the child, and parents are trying to figure out what to do, and they tend to swing back and forth to spanking, to permissiveness, to and so it's really about, we don't know how to tolerate the discomfort. So when a child's having a temper tantrum, we have to be able to tolerate our own discomfort and guide our children through their discomfort. But we've sort of tried to take away the discomfort after we learned how we're supposed to parent. But it really is about, all feelings are okay, but all behavior isn't. And that's one of my favorite lines. My clients hear me say it all the time. So how do we allow ourselves to give ourselves permission to feel all the feelings, anger, jealousy, just, hatred even. I was raised don't hate, but it's a strong word. But there's all kinds of feelings. I say to my clients, what are you feeling? And they say, oh, I'm mad, or I'm frustrated. And Brene Brown did some research on, people and what the typical feelings they have. And she said there were mainly 3, and they were happy, sad, and pissed. But there's so many more feelings. So I have a feeling word sheet that I work with when I help clients excavate what they're feeling. And we get to other words like dismissed, unlovable, betrayed, violated, all kinds of feelings that we feel, but we don't know what to do with them because we don't have a narrative for that yet. And that's what we're trying to do, is write a new story, create a new narrative for how we can know that all feelings are okay, and then find healthy outlets so that we don't act them out, which is what we're seeing with a lot of the behavior with people having feelings and we're acting out in various ways because we're in fear, and we don't know what we're feeling, and we don't know what to do with those feelings. So we get angry, or we get depressed, or and we yeah. So that's a
Mhm.
really, really good question, and it's a big part of my work, is helping people really excavate, what is it I'm feeling, and it's okay to feel that, and then where's a healthy outlet for that, where's the container, where's the safe way to explore and express and transform that into grace, you know.
Right. Well, partially because I think it's important that everybody hear it again, because um, in case you missed it, share that quote again, because I think that's important for everybody to think about. It's one of those quotes to where you almost want to say to everybody, say this to yourself 3 times.
What we resist persist and often
Yes.
grows stronger. That one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think if it's one of those, I mean, as you say it, and each time I think you get a little bit more meaning out of it and go, wow, that's right.
And it's my theory, Alan. I haven't done research on it. There may be some, but I haven't found any and I can't really back it up. But it's my theory, my own personal theory about the reason we have such an increase in teen suicide and depression is because teens are being talked out of their feelings. And if they could find what I call enlightened witnesses, or people to listen and validate and move into a place of empathy, they can get through that. But what do we do as parents and teachers, and sometimes even counselors and therapists? Okay, well, what are we going to do? How can you make this better? What can you do to make this feel better? Can maybe, if you need to exercise, maybe you need a routine in your life. You see, we just have this kind of pattern of trying to fix things instead of being with and allowing, the individual to move through.
I think it's a great point. And sometimes, and as a guy, I think I've had to learn it maybe a little more so than most. Sometimes people just want to be heard.
Exactly. All
And
the time, not sometimes. I'd
yeah,
say that's something that's all the time.
you're right. You're
It's an
right.
inborn
Yeah.
need to be
Yeah.
seen and to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, the key word that I was trying to use in there was just. So yes, I agree. We always want to be heard, but sometimes we just want to be heard. In other words, we don't need you to fix me right now. I just want to be heard. So yes, I couldn't agree more. Now, some of the things, and you touch on it in the book, that has to do with kind of the similarity of fear and grief as it relates to our nervous system and the way our nervous system responds. So how can we look at that from the standpoint, and again, for me, especially as a male, looking at it and saying, you know, do I not allow myself to feel grief because of this fear of showing that I'm afraid? We have such a fear of when I can't show them that I'm afraid. And so because of that, is that also affecting, because of we know that it feels the same for grief? So talk a little bit about, first of all, the fact that they are similar responses, and maybe what we can do to not stop doing one because of our fear of the other.
Right. The way they're similar, it's very much like a trauma response. Well, it is a trauma response, obviously.
Yeah.
Fear is what happens when we're in trauma. And what happens is our reptilian brain, which is the primitive brain in the back in our brainstem, which was the original part of our brain that was developed for survival. And so to run from the saber-toothed tiger when there was danger,
Okay.
there wasn't any higher functioning that we have developed this, incredible brain through evolution, but we don't use it when we're in fear and grief. Our reptilian brain takes over and thinks we're in danger, and so we go into all kinds of either fight, flight, or freeze responses, and they're not conscious, and we can't, and our frontal lobe, which is our reasoning that kind of integrates all the parts of the brain together and helps us create healthy choices and rational decisions, is completely offline. So we're in this fear response and we think we're in danger. And so when we lose, something, there's a fear of, oh my God, well, I don't know what's going to happen. How can I live without this person or this job? Or, it's fear. We have all kinds of fear that we're all in right now, similar to, if I lose this person or this job, and also my relationships, how am I going to do relationships in this social distancing? So we have to get our frontal lobes back online, basically. And we have to also acknowledge the feelings, because then it also goes into our nervous system response. So we know now with polyvagal theory, which is the largest cranial nerve that comes from the brainstem, that's why we have, digestive issues and our, heart palpitations, because this nerve is all encompassing in our body. And so we feel the fear, and it can actually make us physically ill. I mean, it has a lot to do with our immune system. So once we realize all that, then we exhale. We go, oh, okay, how do I find a sense of emotional safety right now in this moment? Hopefully get that frontal lobe back online, and then I can really work with my grief and my fear a little bit more rationally. But I mean, it's not easy to get that frontal lobe back online, and we have to realize, once we realize though that's what happens in the neurobiology, it kind of demystifies what's going on a little bit. But it takes time. It takes a lot of practice.
Well, many of our listeners are parents. We also have a lot of teachers and just caregivers in general. What should a person say or not say to people who are at that moment going through some sort of deep level of grief, or just grieving in general? And I know, again, there's so many different possibilities in regards to what type of grief and such, but what would you say to them, now, as the person that it might be the only caregiver that's around them now, with everybody being quarantined and things like that? They may only be getting this information from one person. Mm-hmm. What would you tell them?
Well, it goes back to what you said, is we all need to be heard. So how do you validate? And this, again, is the hard part when you were saying, this whole fix it mentality. And I work a lot with reflective listening with my clients, and particularly couples, reflecting back. So someone says, oh, I'm just having such a bad day. This is so awful. So-and-so, la, la, la. And you just repeat that back. Oh my gosh, you're having a really hard day. So-and-so, la, la, la. Whatever, you say what the person said, and that person feels heard, and that feels good. But what we typically don't do that. What we typically do is, well, let me go talk to so-and-so for you. And let me, oh, well, here's what you need to do to, we just jump over that part. And it seems so simple, listening, but it's so hard, and it's so awkward, and it's so unfamiliar, that you really yourself have to take a deep breath when you're in empathy with another person and you want to listen. Because even myself, after all these years, I still find myself in my mind, well, what might help this person? And I have to catch myself. And I have a really good friend who wrote a book called Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve, and her partner died a few years before mine, and she was a friend of my partner. And I love her book because she shared her stories of, the way people had a hard time hearing her grief. And she really wrote the book to give people permission to grieve. So she's my favorite person to call. I mean, we all need a person like that to call. And I say to her, I said, you're the only person that would understand. We went on a hike on my birthday last week, and I said, you're the only person that would understand. I'm still grieving after 4 years. She goes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know, it was kind of like 5 for me. I mean, so that just felt so good. It gave me permission to say it. And then we had a great day. We had a great hike. We had a great time. And that's the other thing people don't understand, is that grief, and we can have, it's paradoxical. Like Martine Prechtel says, is grief and praise. They're the same, because the only reason we're in grief is because of how much we love. If we didn't love that much, we wouldn't grieve. So we can honor our losses and be sad, and at the same time, that's where the grace comes in, finding that, then we can also experience life and the joy of life and the gratitude. You're talking about your gratitude journal. That's so important. People don't think they can be grateful and grieve at the same time, but you absolutely can. And that's really hard for us to get, that paradox.
I couldn't agree more. Now, we are talking today about transforming grief and fear into love and grace. Our guest is Patti Ashley, Ph.D. We're going to take a break right now, but we will be right back. You're listening to Answers for the Family.
Founded over 30 years ago to meet the needs of families in crisis, West Shield has continually focused on resolving issues that negatively impact families and businesses. Our signature therapeutic transportation service helps to ensure that adolescents in crisis are safely transported to specialized schools, programs, and treatment centers with unsurpassed experience and success. We are supported by our full-service licensed investigation agency that has legally, professionally, and compassionately located hundreds of runaways and teens. We are experienced and qualified to help, offering solutions which may include referrals to our international network of top professionals in the fields of educational consulting, psychology, psychiatry, and investigations. Simply put, West Shield Adolescent Services and West Shield Investigations are the best solutions when your family is facing a personal crisis. Call 1-800-899-8585, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 1-800-899-8585, or visit our website at westshield.com. Thank you.
And we're back. We're talking with Patti Ashley, and our subject is the transformation of grief into love and grace. Now, we have some listener questions that have come in, and again, I want to thank those that take the time to send in questions. I know many of you have said that you are teachers or you are doing something, working in the middle of the day, and so by us getting these questions answered, that you come back on and listen at a later time, and again, it is much appreciated. So Patti, this first question it reads, I lost my grandfather to the COVID virus, but he was already very ill with Parkinson's and in hospice care. It is the first member of my family to pass on since I was a small child, and I did not realize how very deeply it would affect me. The grief I feel and the fear of dying I watched on his face struck me too. Knowing that we are all going to leave someday, I was wondering which one of your books would be best for me as a 25-year-old. I can't listen live today, but will listen to the show in the evening. Thanks so much, Gina.
Oh my gosh, I'm tearing up, Gina. I'm feeling so much empathy for that. And first answer would be certainly Letters to Freedom, From Fear to Love to Grace would be the book that would be the most helpful for you. I do want to acknowledge that I hear the fear of death and dying and the grief with your grandfather. And also, interesting how so many times we think when people die when they're older that, we shouldn't have as much grief because, well, they were going to die anyway, different from, it's tragic if we lose a child. That's definitely one of the worst. But all grief is grief, and all grief is a passageway into these deeper questions that we ask. And it's a gift, and it's not easy. So thank you for your question. And I hear how hard this is.
I'd like to talk a little bit about energy because I know much of what you put in your book really touches on energy. And I think it's an area that a lot of people out there aren't familiar with. So if you can share a little bit about that and just to kind of enlighten a lot of people that may not be quite as familiar with how important our energy is, or how important where situations that are out there that are taking that energy, how important that is in sometimes harming us.
Yeah, I don't, there are people who do specifically energy work and work with the chakras and the energy system and Reiki, and I don't do any, I am not a practitioner in energy work per se, but I've studied it quite a bit. Carolyn Mace is one of my favorite teachers, and the Eastern medicine energy system of the chakras. I know a lot about that, but I don't really talk about it a lot. So it's interesting, Alan, that you brought that up because it's so important, and it kind of is like always running in the background for me in addition to the neurobiology that I talked about earlier, the vagus nerve and the brain stem and the frontal lobe getting back online. But yes, energy, we're made of energy, right? I mean, it's all energy. And it's also, spiritual teachers tell us that we're all connected, and again, for me, that's when I go into the whole grace and it's a mystery, and how do I get into my body and how do I manage what I'm feeling. So energetically, I think, if you look at the chakra system, the 7 chakras, you can definitely see, our root chakra is our stability, our second chakra is our sexuality, our third is our self-esteem, and our fourth is our heart, fifth is our throat, and and then our higher levels of thinking or whatever. I mean, I'm always working with that with clients, but I don't talk about it a lot. So it's interesting that you ask me that, because it is important. I think we have to get our own energy back too. Like Carolyn Mace talks about, we're so plugged in sometimes to our fear. So this is what we create. We create stories from our fear, and the fear begins. What I write about in my recent book, Shame Informed Therapy, is how a feeling of not being emotionally safe gets set up in the nervous system and the brain, because in early childhood, when this whole need to be held and touched and feel sensory safety in the old child rearing patterns got really messed up. And so we're still learning. I'm so glad when I see articles that say you can't hold a baby too much, you can't spoil a baby, but those were all things that were attached to these old parenting beliefs. So our body then has a sensory experience of not being loved or lovable, and so then that's when we create the stories in our mind as we continue to develop about what I need to do in order to be lovable and to get love. And you can see that in so many different ways people act out. And so as far as energy, what Carolyn May says is, so if that story has led me to maybe overgive too much, codependency, people pleasing, you want to unplug from that story to get your energy power back, and then rewrite this new story of, I don't have to deplete my own resources and overgive in order to be lovable. So it's all somewhat connected, but again, my new piece of work is really fascinating about restoring these old patterns that we make up in order to help ourselves feel lovable, when really it's the feeling in the body. It is energy. It's the feeling of being physically safe. So much, and this is in this time right now, so much that comes from physical touch. Okay. And it's really odd for me to go see a friend for dinner and say air hug. I can't give you a hug. And I'm feeling it in my body. It's just not normal. We're just wired for that. Just like we're wired, we have the innate need to be heard, seen and heard. We're also wired for connection and touch. And so there's a lot of things energetically that are going on, and we're plugged into all kinds of things trying to feel safe. So really it's like, how do you unplug, come back into physical safety in this present moment? Which I say, it's kind of like with your gratitude practice again. I've been telling people that find 5 things that are safe right now: the chair you're sitting in, the dinner that's cooking, your pet, the birds that are singing, the flowers that are blooming, and it brings your body back into present moment safety. That's one way to kind of get your energy back on in present time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's essentially getting the gratitude that you have these things, to be able to rely on, or things that are are going to be constant. So I couldn't agree more. But just to let you know, I mean, in regards to the books, I felt that there was, you so subtly touched on energy as being a part of it through your books that,
I'm going to have to reread them.
Yeah, but that's what I got out of it. But along these lines, we actually have another an instant message coming in. And this one kind of touches on what people are going through right now. This one reads, everywhere I go, there are people who act so frightened if you get anywhere close to them, even with the masks we are wearing. I'm very over this, as the research I am reading says this virus is terribly overblown, for the tests being inaccurate, to the infection rate constantly being announced without adding that we're testing somewhere from 10 to 100 times as many people, to the death toll being fraudulently reported. I know this is a serious virus. Is the fear and anxiety being constantly drilled into us contributing to the higher death rate than a bad flu season? And if so, what would you recommend we do to suffer the least amount of harm psychologically from this? And this is from Jeremy in New York.
Wow. That's a great question. Yes. So here's what's happening is because, as I said, the frontal lobe's going offline and people are reacting, and those are the reactions I'm seeing as well. People are grumpy, people are, road rage, people are not patient, and they're in a reactive state. So Linda Hartling did some research on shame and trauma, well, reactions to shame basically, which are similar to our reactions to trauma. And she said there's three main ways people react when they're in a shame. When I talk about shame, I'm talking about this feeling of not being emotionally safe, not feeling a sense of I am lovable and I'm worthy, as Brene Brown says, of love and belonging. And so it's kind of a strange word too, like grace. People have different meanings for shame, but I want to clarify, as I talk about shame, I'm talking about this feeling of not being worthy of love and belonging that is unconscious, that I don't walk around knowing really is happening, but I operate on these stories that I made up as ways to get love and feel a sense of love and belonging. So Linda Hartling defines three ways to do that. We either move away, where we either isolate and avoid and we just don't deal with things. We move towards, which is the people-pleasing, codependency, overgiving, or we move against, and that's when you see the anger and the road rage and the defensiveness and the gaslighting and the some of the narcissistic responses. And so so that's what I'm noticing when I notice a person's behavior. I'm seeing it's going to be in one of those three categories, and I'm also going to realize that it's just fear. It's simply their reaction to this fear. We are so unsure of what's going to happen with this virus. And like Jeremy said, there's so many theories. I mean, there's so many stories. There's so much fake news. There's so much conspiracy theory. There's so much, I just had a horrible experience this last week over, something on the internet that I thought was true, but wasn't. And it really kind of struck me as, as much as I know, I'm still, who knows what's true? How do we really know what's true? Which then leads us to this inner, like the mystics, St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, when they were living in the dark ages and the times when they didn't have a lot of external control, that's when they started going inward. And that's where your mindfulness meditation and your self-reflection and your inner work actually gives you more of a connection to yourself. Or even like Viktor Frankl's work, where he wrote Man's Search for Meaning when he was in a prisoner camp. He had no control over the fact that he was in prison, so he really went inward. So my hope is that it's leading us all inward, and I created a course called Go In Not Out at the very beginning of the quarantine, a free course on my learning site, that in order to help give people some tools to do that. Because I don't think we, again, have a narrative or a story yet for what it's going to look like. And, a lot of people are saying this is a paradigm shift that's going to create a whole new way of being in the world, which I think we could use. But I think if that's true, we're not just going to get there easy. I think we have to go through really facing our fear to get to the grace and to do our inner work. And to really have empathy for everyone's reaction, because that's all it is. And Stephen Porges says is every action is a reaction in the sake of safety and survival. So, there's a lot of feeling unsafe going on right now.
I know. And I'm glad that you brought up the your site with the courses, because again, I checked that out. And for anybody, I highly recommend that you check this out. And the site is Authenticity architects.thinkIFIC.com. And again, if you're driving, I mean, don't try to write this down, and I'll try to go over that again here before we get off the air. We'll also put it on the Answers for the Family site. So again, you can go to its Authenticity Architects and it's THINKIFIC.com. And for the books, you can go to Patti's website, which is just pattiashley.com. That's Patti with an I, PATTIASHLEY.com.
And those links too, Alan, are on my website. So Patti with an I, PattiAshley.com. You have the links to the websites, the links to the book, the links to working with me, and everything is right there. So
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah.
Perfect. So one of the things that I do in the show, and some refer to it as the magic wand, and I keep saying that I'm gonna plan this ahead of time and give somebody one so that I can do that thing that they do where they reach out like this, and then you show up and you have this wand. But anyway, if I'm reaching through and I'm handing you a magic wand, what are some of the changes that you would want to see right now to help people make this conversion much more seamlessly, to be able to go from grief and fear to love and grace?
Well, I just so happen to have my magic wand. So.
That's great. I need to have one here. I love it.
And I wish it was that easy. I always say that.
Yes.
I think it, for me, it's love. And love, again, is another word. We talk about, the word grace and the word shame and the word love. The meaning of what that means, I think a lot of times people don't even understand what that word means, because it gets tied into fear and even manipulation. You love me if you do this for me, then that's love. That's not what love is. Love is letting go. Love is unconditional. Love is allowing. Love is, I believe, and again, back to energy and spirituality and all the things I don't typically talk a lot about. To me, it is that love and grace. I mean, that's transforming grief and fear into love and grace. So we either are in fear or love. And I think, again, because love is misunderstood, really, what does love feel like? Sometimes the only way we know is if we think about appreciation. What does it feel like when we've been appreciated? What does it feel like when we appreciate someone? What is our experience of love? And I think the more we can do that, we can have more empathy and compassion for one another. And I think we really need a lot of that. It's interesting. I always think, my son, when he was 8, he said, "Mom, you could never be president because you'd say, be happy, get along. You could never, send the country to war." And I am. I'm like, Marianne Williamson, I love her and her work. And she speaks so much about, spirituality and love and compassion and connection. And, people, think she's, a flaky new age, whatever. I don't know. She's got definitely a lot more credibility, but, so I don't want to come off new age flaky, but there's this idea, because I'm not. I'm very grounded. I'm very grounded, research, scientific. I've looked at all of the parts in my life's journey, and it all comes back to love. So that's my magic wand. What does it mean to really love unconditionally?
See, and you touched on something that somehow I feel like things have been turned upside down, because what you're talking about, should not be considered flaky or anything else. But for some reason, if you say something horrible and nasty and very hateful, that gets all the publicity. People want, for some reason, to listen more to that person, or to send them, send them money, or elect them into office. And yet, there are so many great people like yourself and like Marianne Williamson, that as soon as they want to take it a step further and go, you know what, let's try to get this information out to more people. There's this force that wants to sort of pretend like it's foo-foo stuff. It's all fluff and it's all this. And I'm so glad that you brought it up, because it really isn't. And that's what we need people to understand, is that for whatever reason, the outside influences that want to say that, they have their own reasons as to why they want the attention to go somewhere else. But we're stronger than that. And to everybody out there, you don't have to buy into all of that. You don't have to buy into the hate. You don't have to buy into the divisiveness. And part of this show is what I've tried to do, is to have people like Patti on to let people know there is a lot of people that see this in this peaceful, happy, healthy way. And you can too. We all can, but it takes all of us to sort of get behind and focus on this, and give your eyeballs and your ears, which means your reading and your listening, to a lot more people like Patti, and a lot less people like the ones that seem to get the attention on either major media networks or whatever way in which they seem to want to get their information out. So I just want to tell you, thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, do I have a minute to speak a little bit to that? You're probably going to have me back on the show because I have a lot to say about that. But do I have 2 minutes more to?
You actually, you have 1.5, because I still have to close, but yes.
Okay. When I was writing Living in the Shadow of the Two Good Mother, the Da Vinci Code came out, and I got fascinated with the whole idea that Mary Magdalene could have been Jesus's wife. And it led me on this whole search of the suppression of the feminine and what that means, and the power and control in the patriarchal model that's been going on for so long is really about fear. And what Mary Magdalene, I believe, this is kind of, again, talk about out there, but Mary Magdalene and I believe and Jesus were teachers together. And that's what they were trying to teach, is this unconditional love. But it's so hard when we get in our fear and we override, and then we get in, then even religion and, politics and everything has created these stories around fear. And so I really feel like if you look at the suppression of the feminine with the witch hunts and the, burning the witches and torturing the midwives, you can see the suppression of, this whole idea of what, women, not just women, it's not about gender, but it's really like the right brain, our emotional self. In the left brain, stories of fear take over. So again, you'll have to have me back on the show if you want to know more about that.
I would love it. And I know that our producer, Jan, listens. So Jan, let's get her back on. Patti, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you, and acknowledge the value of the books that you're putting out. And for everybody out there, I highly recommend that you get them. So Patti, thanks again.
Thank you, Alan.
All right. And for everybody out there, with so many of us having been kind of dramatically distanced, from each other, Ellen Meredith, author of The Language Your Body Speaks, will discuss how now more than ever, why understanding that energy is our essence is so important to our health and wellness. So be sure to put us on your calendar and tune in next Monday. Please, you can also visit our archives of past interviews at answersforthefamily.com, or subscribe to the show through iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, Spreakers, or SoundCloud. And if you do, please let us know, what you think. Leave a review. We can always stand a little bit of improvement. So it'll help us, it'll help other people, and they're making their choices on what to listen to. And just know that if you can allow us to help reach more people, we will do what we can to bring this type of easy for me to say, positive message out there to people. So for everybody out there, be good human beings and be with us again next week on Answers for the Family.
You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.